Morning, everyone. I think we are ready to start. It's 11:30. Welcome to the Loneliness Epidemic Workshop. My name is Andrea Echeverri. I work for the Student Health Center as a program specialist. And part of our huge goal at the health center is to provide support and self-care strategies for our Cuesta community. This workshop is also an opportunity to connect our students and employees with mental health by reducing the stigma, providing education, early intervention, promoting wellness and local resources available for all of us. To make the workshop a success, we will ask you to mute the microphones and raise your hand to participate. This event will be recorded, but the identity of the participants will remain confidential. Some of the questions we will explore today are, what is the difference between being lonely, alone, and in solitude? How are technology use and the pandemic influencing our experiences of community? How does our relationship with nature relate to our experiences of loneliness? I'm very glad to have Dara today. Dara, this is your second time sharing with us your experience. Dara, this time I'm let you introduce yourself and tell us a little more about you and all the great work that you are doing in our community. And then we will be ready to start.
Thanks, Andrea, so much. It's really nice to see you and Nicole, and looking forward to getting to know some others in the workshop today. Yes, I'm Dara Sheik. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I do a few things in the community primarily. I have a private psychotherapy practice where I work with adults psychodynamically and individual therapy. I also work for Cottage Health, where we do some intensive outpatient programs and provide group support for various mental health challenges and people in recovery. And then I do, workshops like this in the community occasionally, just to raise awareness around issues that, I have some passion around, or that I think that are really crucial to, like Andrea said, reducing stigma around things that, could really help people suffer less and hopefully experience less pain. So I'm really grateful to be here. And also just a little bit of background. I was a student at Cuesta quite a few years ago and had a very positive experience. I remember being there very fondly, having really good teachers. And it was a really important part of my journey in terms of my own development. In my career and so forth. So it's really cool to be able to come back and just participate with the Cuesta community as it is right now. And I also want to really appreciate or send my appreciation to you, Andrea, for helping us get this organized. I know it takes a lot of work. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. So I would prefer to be able to see folks. It would make it more dynamic. So if you're brave enough to come on your camera, I would encourage you to do so. And I want to start out actually by just having people answer a question. And it would be helpful today if you had a pad and maybe some paper, a pen, or if you want to take notes on your laptop or whatever it is that you do. But we're going to try to make this somewhat interactive so this doesn't turn into like a TED Talk or something like that. So the first question I'd like to ask you guys, and I'll go ahead and see if I can share my screen here. Okay, so I'd like you to simply answer the question, what is loneliness? And I'd like you to just write down either a definition or a description, and go ahead and take a minute for that. And let's take another 20 seconds or so. Okay, so go ahead and pause wherever you are. And I'd like to hear some answers of what you guys thought of or wrote down. So what is loneliness? And you can just provide a show of hands and or unmute yourself.
I wrote that loneliness is a feeling and without any predicate. And then I put of isolation if I had to label that.
Excellent. Thanks, Marty. So a feeling predominantly and a feeling of isolation. Okay, thank you for sharing. Others.
I wrote
something.
You go first. Go first.
Okay. I wrote something similar, feelings of being sad and alone due to having no one with us.
Okay. Great. Thank
Sorry if
you.
I went too fast. Sure.
Yeah. How do you pronounce your name? Is it Lisha?
Aisha.
Aisha. Okay, great. Aisha, thank you. So a feeling of being sad and being alone. So great. Thank you. And Nicole?
I wrote a feeling or experience of not having a social connection you otherwise would like or want.
Uh-huh. So the absence of social connection that you want.
Yeah, because I like distinguishing between being alone and feeling loneliness.
Yes. Yeah. So, and you really bring in the part about what we desire, what we want, right, in terms of connection or relationship. And that is a crucial part of how we experience loneliness. So thank you. Others definitions. Yeah. Diane, sorry.
I just, for me, loneliness is just being disconnected. Just disconnected.
Great, short and sweet, disconnected. Yeah, thank you, Diane. Monica.
Going with Diane, you can be lonely when you're with someone, but feel so disconnected with them. And I think in male-female relationships, you get that every once in a while in marriage.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, that's a really important example because I think that people feel like if they're in serious relationships, or even if they're surrounded by family or friends, that they almost don't have a right to feel lonely, that, it's like, oh, I shouldn't feel lonely, But in fact, it goes back to what I think Nicole was touching on, which is about, it's an internal experience. So it's about what I desire in terms of connection. And if I'm not feeling that in the moment with anybody, then I can feel lonely, right? And sort of dissatisfied. And that could be with a spouse, that could be with a best friend, that could be with family, it could be with anybody, right? So.
Dara, several people wrote things in the chat.
So I would prefer that we'd not use the chat.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you want me to share some of them?
No, I'd rather people speak up.
Because there's about 8 in the chat right now. So yeah, if anybody wants to come on and share. I wrote something similar to what was already said, and I put a feeling of emptiness and sadness resulting from feeling lack of connection.
Okay. Yeah, and I think that, one of the things you're bringing forth, Tanya, and I think some others have, is that, for example, there are other feelings that are often associated with loneliness. So like sadness, right? So this is often an experience that is painful. It is not a pleasant experience, right? And I think that, like the use of sadness is one way to describe what it's like to feel it. So yeah. Thanks, Tanya. It's nice to see you.
Nice to see you too.
Yeah. Others, I think I saw maybe Rebecca earlier.
Tanya stole my thunder. I had emptiness also.
Okay.
Kind of along the same lines as Nicole and Dee and Monica were saying, just you can be with people, but still feel loneliness. So I had emptiness and a disconnect.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Great. So for example, here, I mean, at least through Zoom, we're with, 33 people right now. But yet, you could be feeling like there's something missing in terms of connection for you, and therefore you could be feeling lonely right now, right? It's possible. So, okay. Anyone else that wants to share before we keep moving forward?
It might
Okay.
be lack of a hug right now.
Yeah.
In our
Yes.
current environment, loneliness is lack of hugs.
Yes, that's a great modern,
We need more.
post-pandemic definition. So yeah. So, and again, it brings in like the value of perhaps physical intimacy, right, in terms of connection, and that can be a big part of how people experience connection, right? So
Yes.
yeah. So,
There,
okay. Go ahead.
if I could say, there's some, like when you say loneliness, it could be somebody maybe has a pet that comforts them too, and it places that, replaces
Yes.
that loneliness too, or maybe a music instrument or something that, what I mean, that they do to help fulfill that loneliness. There's, I think, more than just physical, a person or people.
Yes. Diane, you're way ahead of me here because you're really broadening the definition to include relationships other than just human relationships, right? And so loneliness could include other kinds of connections that we feel or experience in our lives, right? Someone could, like, if your pet just died, you could be feeling extreme loneliness because you miss the companionship of going with a walk, going on a walk with your dog, or just hanging out on the couch, right? And there are tons of examples like that we could broaden out, and we'll get to later as well. So yeah, thanks. Mary.
Hi. I would say that Zoom exacerbates loneliness. And I think it does because we miss the people that we're seeing. And I think that close interaction, seeing body language, being able to hug, I've heard that. I think Zoom has tended to exacerbate. Dee mentioned that, having a pet or, with you helps, maybe relieve some of that loneliness, but pet adoptions are up all over the place during this COVID time. I know some of the rescues can't keep dogs and cats in, to be adopted. They're being adopted out all over the place. And then we're worried about our young students, our K-12 students, especially, who are having problems. They're having mental issues. They're having depression. They're having anxiety. They're sad because they're not with their classmates. They're not with their teachers. And I think that it just gets worse the more. I mean, great, they see them on Zoom, but there's something to that physicalness of being around other people that's so important to us as humans.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important to, again, acknowledge that it's not the same, right? And that's another thing I'd like to explore a little bit further today is what are the differences, right, between being here and if we were all in a room together, and we'll definitely explore that a little bit further as well. So yeah. All right, so let me share my screen with you again. Okay, can everyone see my screen, by the way? Okay, cool. So I just want to share with you, there are many ways to define and describe loneliness, as we've just seen. But one of the definitions that I like is that loneliness is the gap one experiences between what one desires in terms of connection and relationship and what one experiences as currently having. So that difference between what you desire and what you actually experience is felt as loneliness if there's a shortcoming, right? So it really speaks to some of the things that I think, for example, that were brought up perhaps by Nicole earlier, that it speaks to what we each want. And so it's an internal subjective experience, right? I can't look at you from the outside and know whether you're experiencing loneliness in your life or not. I could guess, but I don't actually know until maybe I get to know you, or I ask you, or you let me know. Because again, you might look content on the outside, you might be surrounded by people, but there may be a dissatisfaction somewhere, a gap between what you wish you had, what you desire, and what you actually experience. So I think that that's a really important aspect of this. And then to take it a little bit further and talk about this difference that I think we've already started to touch on, I'd like you guys to also just maybe write down a definition or description of solitude. What is solitude? And then we'll talk a little bit about these differences. And let's take another 20 seconds or so. Okay, and you can find a place to pause. And now I'm curious about this question. So what is solitude? How would you define that or describe that?
So I break the
Diane.
ice again. Oh, go ahead.
Oh yeah, we'll go to Diane first, then Marty. Yeah.
I look at solitude and I look at my life and I look at freedom. The word freedom comes with some solitude.
Okay. Yeah, that's an interesting association. That's great. So you associate freedom with the experience of solitude. So cool. Thanks. And Marty?
Let's see, I had it as, I just took the notion of isolation or whatever would be where I was alone, because solitude, I would have to be alone, but then it's, sort of bathed in peace. So that's the way I look at solitude is you take being alone and whatever you got there, and then you transfer it to this peaceful feeling, which, addresses whatever negativity that's there.
Yeah, that again, I mean, I appreciate the way that you've laid it out because it makes a lot of sense to me. So it includes being alone kind of more objectively, right? Like I could be up at a cabin alone, and you associate that with a state of peace, just kind of like Diane associates it with a sense of freedom, right? Yeah, so again, we're getting a real contrast to loneliness, which people describe as being associated with sadness, for example, or emptiness, right? So others, yeah, let's go to Julianne and then Shamara.
When you mentioned solitude, the first thing that came to my mind was a choice. Sometimes when I feel loneliness, it's not always a choice, but solitude, I think of, like somebody mentioned, going and being alone because that's what I choose to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a key part of the difference in terms of definition, is that, I may choose to go to my cabin alone, for some time to read over the weekend or something like that. And that could be a really, kind of enjoyable experience perhaps, or I could experience contentment doing that. Whereas like you're saying, loneliness is not something that anyone chooses to experience or feel. It's painful, it's difficult, and no one would really purposely choose that, I don't believe. So, and Shamar?
I was going to say exactly what Julie just said, but I also kind of associate solitude with peacefulness, with tranquility. It's kind of a meditative state. So it's usually how I feel when I'm out in nature or choosing to remove myself and maybe do some deep breathing. And also like with some feelings that I kind of associate with solitude is like humility. Whereas I think with loneliness, there's that sadness. So that's kind of, I feel like the difference for me was solitude versus loneliness.
Yeah. The more you guys talk, the more I want to find this experience of solitude right now. You know, I mean, there's so many great associations: humility, tranquility, you know, serenity. I mean, it sounds like kind of a really healthy experience, right? So, Corinne.
Yeah, I was just going to say too, there's actually a ski resort that's called Solitude. It kind of represents, you know, having to be able to have the freedom to go out, be in nature, kind of do your own thing. I mean, I associate positive things with solitude, and to also then be able to self-reflect and just kind of be with yourself in a way.
Yeah, that's cool. Good name for the ski resort. Yeah, thank you. And then I think I saw Randy's hand, maybe.
Yeah, so I just put a peaceful enjoyment of the perception of the reality that you find yourself in, or that you just kind of how you were seeing where you are in the world.
Excellent. Thank you. And Matthew?
Actually, my thoughts follow the last three. A space where we face our inner thoughts and stirrings. So it's not necessarily peace, although that often is, you know, associated with that, but sometimes it's just kind of a reality check, as Randy just kind of mentioned, just that we are facing kind of the stirrings, the distractions of the outer world are no longer kind of outs for us. We're kind of in a place where our inner thoughts, our inner stirrings kind of have a bigger space for our consideration.
Yeah, I appreciate you kind of, you know, disassociating it from maybe only pleasant experiences, right? I mean, I guess one could be in solitude and find that the things that are coming up are actually difficult too, right? But that could be part of the experience. So yeah, thanks, Matthew. It's good to see you as well.
Good to see you.
And is it Miss, I don't know if it's Miss, Mrs., Mr. Rocha, but I can't see the first name.
It's Nikki Rocha.
Okay, Nikki,
it's kind of interesting because I almost have a little bit of opposite view, because I wrote down solitude as standing alone, either by choice or almost by being socially appointed or pushed there. And I think of, I don't know, when people, not necessarily like in power or maybe in the media, that they're in solitude or alone, and we've almost, you know, as a society viewed them as being alone or put them on a pedestal. So yeah, it's really interesting to see a lot of the other people talk about the peace of it, when sometimes I view solitude as alone, not always by choice. So yeah,
great.
Different spin.
Yeah, thanks for that perspective as well. So thanks, Nikki. And then Tanya.
Yeah, I like many, I put peace, comfort, and a time for reflection. But the other thing that I put is something that's needed. So as much as we need connection, we also need times of solitude.
So perhaps it's a way to maybe balance things out, right, is what you're suggesting. So yeah.
And the reflection part can be, as people have suggested, sometimes we're reflecting on positive things, but sometimes we need time to reflect on things that are difficult and that we are healing from.
Yes, absolutely. I think it also brings, for me, to mind personality differences. So, you know, extroverts, introverts, you know, and kind of maybe how they experience these things differently. It makes me curious, you know, are introverts maybe a little bit more likely to seek out and want quiet, you know, times of solitude than extroverts? But those are things to maybe consider as well. So
yeah, and I'm as far over as you can pretty much get on the extroversion side.
We're total opposites, Tanya.
I need time for reflection too. In this current environment, it's been more than I need. But yes, I think, and so it's important to realize that, just as people who maybe are introverted and need more time for reflection also need that connection.
Yes. Great, thank you. Okay, so let me just go back to the screen. So I think, again, you know, you guys really we already covered this, right? So to be alone is just an objective state, right? You could walk by a restaurant and say, oh, you know, Julie is at the restaurant having dinner alone. but you don't know how she's feeling, whether she's feeling lonely or she's not, or maybe she's in solitude, but she is objectively alone, right? It's just an objective state. And then solitude includes choice, like others have talked about already. And again, that loneliness often is associated with a painful or difficult experience that people are really trying to avoid, and whereas the other states, not so much. Sometimes people might, be okay with being alone, or like we've talked about, being in solitude. So I do think that sometimes these words get a little bit mixed up. So it's helpful to kind of know what we're talking about before we go further into it. So any questions about just kind of, laying this foundation of what is loneliness? How do we describe it? What are some of the differences between some of these other, sort of tangent experiences?
Okay. Dara, I just wanted to add that I was just thinking something interesting, like in my first language is Spanish, and we don't have a different word for each one. So it's soledad, but we have to add like something extra for a description, like soledad when it's positive, or negative soledad. And I now understand what way you are talking about, like when it's solitude and when it's your choice, or when it's something that it just happens and you don't really want to. So it's what we call like a bad soledad, like something negative. So it is interesting that we don't have a word to define each one.
Yeah, that makes me very curious about a lot of things, in terms of whether or not, loneliness is more of a modern experience, for example, or maybe an experience that has become more prevalent in certain cultures, like our own, of course, things like that. But that's really interesting. So thanks for sharing that. Yeah. Okay. So I do want to talk a little bit about so what we already started talking about, which is just kind of this impact of the pandemic on increased technology use and how we're all interacting with each other. So I want us to actually talk a little bit further about just this experience we're having right now. So I actually led one of these workshops, I think it was a little over a year ago, at the Cuesta campus, just similar to this in terms of style. And we were in a room together, right? So there was a room, everyone came in, everyone sat around, and we did this, right? We probably used some technology, I don't recall, maybe there was a PowerPoint slide or something like that. But in fact, I think I was actually using the whiteboard. So I don't think there was a whole lot of technology involved. So what are the differences between if we were in a classroom right now all together doing this versus doing it this way on video? Let's talk about some of the specific differences of this experience. So I'm just curious. So Randy.
So we miss out on kind of like, say if we were going to be meeting somewhere, before the meeting, maybe we would get to talk with each other one-on-one, or even after. But with these kind of interactions, once it's over, the whole meeting just kind of gets shut down and we don't really get a chance to connect on an individual level.
Yeah, I think that's a huge one, right? So perhaps as people started to trickle into the room, if we were together, certain people would have just started talking to each other, perhaps, right? Having individual conversations with each other, that kind of thing. Or maybe even on your way in, maybe you bump into somebody, that parked next to you and you start having a conversation while you're walking into the room, right? That cannot happen here at all, right? So. And those would have been mostly spontaneous encounters, right? You wouldn't have necessarily pre-planned that you're going to see someone that walking to the room from the parking lot, but it would have been a spontaneous, like, oh, hey, Julie, and then you start talking, right? That's not happening now, right? So, Rebecca.
Same thing that Randy said. It would have taken you longer to get this started because we would have been chit-chatting. And then for some of us that are like, for example, Dee's a friend of mine. She's in the North County primarily. We probably would have revolved going to lunch or something around this. If it was in the morning, we'd go to lunch after, or we would have, if it was in the afternoon, maybe gotten dinner together afterwards or something. But it's the whole social, we'll take what we can get right now, but that would have been a big part of it.
Yeah, right. So there would have been more around it, right? There would have been a continuum of this experience. Like, oh, cool, let's go meet at this workshop, and then let's plan to have coffee or lunch afterwards, and maybe whatever else, right? So, okay, thanks. And let's go to Nikki.
Yeah, so I miss like interpreting body language of people, and then like how I know it's a big communication, and maybe some of us who've had classes on communication, how you really read and pick up on different signals than you do. Because here I am sitting at work, but I don't have a camera, so I can't even like interpret kind of or you guys can't, what's going on with me. And then I also miss at times, like when we talk about running into each other, just letting a conversation go on its own without an agenda, without like, okay, here's what we have to talk about. Here's what we have to do. Just like catching up with a person. I miss that part. So,
right. So more of a flow. And again, picking up on just the energy and the body language. I mean, we don't, even on video, mostly we're just seeing kind of our top thirds or maybe top halves. And we're not getting the full spectrum of what we would get if we were all sitting in chairs in a circle, for example. So there's a huge difference there too, in terms of the energy that we're not able to pick up on, because there's something very flat about this, right? So, great, thank you.
Can I just ask a question to Nikki?
Yes.
Is that okay?
Yes, yeah.
Nikki, all this, do you not want a camera, or you're unable to get a camera?
I haven't asked for one. So I have a computer system, and I think at the time it wasn't really a priority. When I do need to be like seen, I do have access to an iPad. But my vision isn't that great. So when you're trying to see things on an iPad versus a full screen, I love seeing all you people talking with my hands here on the beautiful screen versus like hovering 2 inches away on my iPad.
I know you just got a beautiful smile and personality. I think it would be even so happily if we could see your face, and I think it'd probably make you feel good too. Just asking.
Thank you. Thank you.
And then let's go to N Webb. You're muted.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
So when Nikki was talking, it made me realize one of the things that I miss about us all being together and being able to talk in person is we can actually share in a way that we value each other. If someone's going through something, or if they're actually celebrating something, we get to share that. And the only way that happens, or at least what I've seen is the only way that happens right now, is if people linger after the meeting, if they have a few minutes, and those that have time linger after the meeting, and then they catch up on where each other is. So I do miss that. That's a big hole in my life right now. It has been filled on occasion. I'm not feeling as lonely right now as I have at other times, but that's a huge part for me.
Yeah, and I don't know if you were getting at something like what I'm going to share, but it's inspired me to think about also that, for example, if we were in a room together, like let's say people were starting to come into the space and there weren't enough chairs, right? Someone might offer their chair to somebody else, or say, I'm going to go get one for you. So there could be these like acts of kindness, or it could go the other way, right? And we could see people acting selfishly. I mean, whatever. But I mean, there are all these opportunities for us to have experiences together, right? To either accommodate each other or not accommodate each other. And those things, again, don't really happen very much in the same way. So, yeah. Tanya.
Yeah, I think very much missing seeing the human interaction and how we support each other, and just seeing people experiencing joy, seeing a friend they haven't seen for a while. I think last time we had some snacks and things, so people come in and they're kind of excited and picking out what what they want to, munch on during the meeting. And there's sort of this energy of being together, right? It's also I think there's a better sense. I mean, we can see the screen now, and I kind of get excited when I see there's 34 people here. But to be in a room with 34 people and feel that energy that we all want to learn about this together, and we're given this opportunity is something we just can't feel. So I think there's a whole energy component, and observing joy, observing smiles and laughter. Miss it.
Yeah, it's also making me think of even just how we greet each other, kind of like you said before. People may be coming into the room, shaking each other's hands before, right? Or hugging each other, or, kissing or whatever, right? I mean, and again, none of that is happening here, right? So, I also wonder about just how we present ourselves. So would we be dressing differently if we were coming into the room together than the way that we are right now, for example? Those kinds of things, and just the way that we, display etiquette, all of that stuff, right? So
yes, and there's joy with that. I know for myself, I feel a little different when I'm picking. All I wear is tennis shoes now. I mean, I think it's kind of that excitement of like picking out what you want to wear and feeling good about presenting yourself is something that is real, and that we're missing out on too. My students have been talking lately about only seeing people from here up, and even as they've connected with me, some of them have never seen me in person and yet have shared, their most intimate concerns and moments with me verbally, and yet they've only seen me from here up, and vice versa. So it's a very, very interesting dynamic, and when there is a connection there, but still this awareness that something's missing.
Yeah, I'm wearing UGG slippers right now, to tell you the truth. So yeah, I would not be doing that if we were in person. So
yeah, all I have on is socks. I have clothes on too.
Good.
This really points out how important bonding is, and that, we don't know what we got until it's gone. And all of this is about the lack and encumbrances to bonding, and we're all feeling it. Something else is, yes, this lack of body language is huge, especially for people with physical and other types of disabilities that are living in the community and in our classrooms. And then the final thing, which is, it's just as simple as raising your hand in a meeting. Now it's like a complete nightmare again for us, whether you, can or can't. Just to raise your hand. Wow. I didn't realize it was so hard.
Absolutely. And I appreciate you kind of bringing in that, it's a little bit different for everybody, right? I mean, like, for example, I am more of an introvert myself. And so I like to be able to kind of sense things, and pick up on those kinds of sensing experiences or my intuition about something. And it is harder to do when we don't have as much energy to kind of interact with, right? So yeah, thanks, Marty. And Matthew, did you have your hand up again, or is it from earlier?
That was earlier, but greetings to Marty. Thanks for sharing that, Marty. It's really touching.
Thanks, Matthew. All right, so let's spring forward. Give me 1 second. I'm just going to pull up our next slide. Okay. Okay, so just, to continue to just talk a little bit about what has also inspired me to talk about this topic. It did seem to me that when I was in grad school, for example, that a lot of the things that we were studying around mental health, issues related to, healthy relationships, even things around social justice issues, a lot of it like touched on the issue of loneliness, or at least it seemed to me that it would associate with it, but we would rarely talk about loneliness directly in the classroom as it related to those kinds of subjects. And so I just kind of became a little bit surprised that we weren't talking about it more directly. And one of the things that I found in some work that I did was that people believe that there's a stigma about loneliness, and that shapes the perception around it. So if 79 or 80% of people believe that loneliness is a stigmatized issue, they're less likely, of course, to admit maybe that they're even experiencing it or to talk about it in any kind of a direct way, which of course then just likely exasperates the situation, right? Because we're not acknowledging how we are, we're not sharing it with each other, and we're not perhaps moving through it. And instead we're just kind of stuck in it. So I think that, we're not going to get into the full discussion around this today because of time. However, I do think that a large part of that is because, historically, perhaps it was some sort of a mark of shame if people were isolated or lonely, because I think that traditionally human beings have always done things together. I mean, it's core to who we are as people. However, there are so many modern contributing factors to increased loneliness now that it's relatively common. We'll see I can show you some stats later about, how common it is, but this is not something that's a rare experience anymore. And therefore, if we're not addressing it, we're really missing something that's just right here, right now. And so I think it's a big deal that we're here talking about it. And it seems to me that we're talking about it, just in my sense, more comfortably perhaps than we would have even just a few years ago, which is cool. And so here are just some of the stats from just a few years ago in terms of how prevalent this is. Cigna did a study, and this is supported by, I would say, other studies as well. And you can see, for example, that 46% of people said they felt sometimes or always alone. And again, this is pre-pandemic, right? Perhaps some of these numbers have actually increased. And that, Gen Z, the younger folks are actually the loneliest. And in fact, it's likely that some of that has to do with just the trends in society in terms of increased technology use and the way that we're acting in different ways, like we're all talking about. I would say that, again, these trends of increased technology use obviously started, years ago, but the pandemic has caused us to double down on technology big time, right? So, I mean, for example, I had really never used video in any kind of way for communicating before the pandemic, and now it's like all I do. I mean, that's how I work, pretty much morning till night. That's a huge change, and that's happening for a lot of people. So it is concerning, I think, that so quickly so much has changed, right, in terms of how we're spending our days and how we're interacting with screens more than we are directly face to face, right? And again, we're not going to get into a fuller, deeper discussion of that, but it is definitely sort of food for thought. So I want to skip ahead a little bit to what I describe as the 5 dimensions of loneliness. And so it came up earlier in the discussion around sort of the definition of it. And I think of loneliness or I have thought of it in terms of 5 dimensions: loneliness in relationship to our family and relative ties, loneliness in relationship to friendships, in relation to romantic relationship, and then in connection to self, and then in terms of spiritual connection. So I think this really speaks to what someone shared earlier about perhaps that, someone could really feel lonely because they miss their dog, for example, right? And I think that what I've liked about this kind of broadening is that it allows us different forms of connection, right, that can be really satisfying and nurturing. The other thing that it does is it can help you kind of identify maybe where you're experiencing loneliness if you are, right? So, maybe you're really satisfied with your romantic relationship right now, but you really wish you had some closer friends, or you really wish that, you had a better bond with your family right now, or something like that. And the thing I want to really kind of highlight is that the difference between these first three categories and the bottom two is that the first three involve really direct relationships with other people, whereas the bottom two can involve other things, right? And so it can be a way to kind of get going, right? Because if you desire like a really great best friend, I mean, you can't just make that happen overnight. You can try to put yourself in a position where you could increase your chances of building good friendships. But you could get going with connection to self and spiritual connection, right? If you really enjoy basketball, perhaps you can, start playing, right? And maybe through those kinds of things, there may be actually more human relationships that develop as kind of a side effect, if you will. So this is a way to kind of broaden it. And I want to actually take this a step further, because as I've kind of, worked with this model, I've thought over time that maybe there's a sixth dimension that was missing here, which is community. So loneliness in relation to connection to community. And I think that the pandemic has made me realize that this is really a dimension that should be added. So let's make this now the 6 dimensions of loneliness, and let's talk a little bit about the community bucket and what that looks like, because I think it's very relevant to what we're experiencing right now. So in contrast to these other 5 categories, what do you guys think that community could include? What would be in that bucket?
Well, in our case, shouldn't community also include the Cuesta community?
Yes, I think it's in the name, right? Community college. So it's, yes. So it's very relevant. So if you are a student at Cuesta, if you are someone who's on the staff, if you're there in any kind of way, right? We're all here right now. So we're right now a part of the Cuesta community, right? So there's a great example. Yeah. Others, yeah.
I know it's been tough taking my kids to the park and not having them have kids to play with. And even when they do go to the park, for some reason, 6 feet apart, I think the measures we have to follow make it tough for my kids. Thank goodness they have each other, but reaching out with other children is it's tough on them not being able to.
Yeah. So again, another really great example of a park being a way to interact with community, right? So I was just talking with a friend about this, and he lives in Europe, and I was like, he's looking for a house, and I was like, oh, are you going to get a place with a yard for your daughter? And he's like, no, this isn't the US. We have plenty of wonderful parks here. Why would I need a yard? And so I think the idea is that, a playground where people come together can be a place to interact with the community, right? And kids can find other kids to play with. So Monica, yeah.
For me, I'm missing the live music community a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. So community can involve an interest that you have, for example, right? Absolutely. Yeah, thank you.
I work in nursing homes, so I travel to my locations, and I'm missing my relationships with the administrators that administrate the nursing homes. That's a key part of the infrastructure of the community, as well as what we're a part of as Cuesta College.
Right. So it's an extension of your work and your connection to Cuesta. So great. Thank you. Any other examples? Yeah, Emily.
I think of community as really for giving back and making yourself feel useful and feel needed, and making your vicinity a more pleasant place for you and the people that interact with the environment around you. And actually, strangely, that's something that I have not missed during this time, because I've found other ways in my neighborhood and, through online groups and things to really feel like I am contributing to my neighbors. And that's been a really positive spin on all this experience.
Yeah, and you know, I don't think we've touched on that aspect of it as much, but certainly there have been opportunities created by the pandemic as well that have not been, you know, negative for some people and for, I would say, maybe a lot of people. And so it's nice that you found ways to get that community connection. But what I really heard is, again, investing in where you are, your surroundings, right? So again, that could be your neighborhood, it could be your city, it could be, you know, et cetera. So. Great. Yeah, and I'm also thinking of, you know, like, for example, I used to live in New York City, and, you know, there was something about New Yorkers that I really was comfortable with, that I connected with. And so I felt like a New Yorker when I was living there. And there would be moments sometimes when I'd be walking down the street and something would happen that I would see that was a very like kind of New York moment, a New Yorker moment. And I would just viscerally connect with that experience. You know, I would just get this feeling of connection and really joy of like, that is so, you know, and it was just, it was a great feeling. And that was, for me, an example of community connection, right? That whatever I was experiencing wasn't with like a friend or anything like that, but it made me feel like I was part of a fabric of something greater than me as I'm walking down the street, right? And so those kinds of things I think have been also diminished to some extent because we're not walking down the street. You know, you're not maybe walking in to talk to the person at the bank anymore that you normally see, or those kinds of things. So I think that's been difficult as well. All right, any other example of community connection before we move forward?
I was just going to say, kind of building on some other comments, community clubs and organizations outside of Cuesta, you know, interest groups we might be involved with, and our churches.
Excellent. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, all, you know, right there. So, you know, a faith community, a religious community, a church, right? All of that. So all really important examples. Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you. Let's see. I'm trying to decide what to do because of time. And give me 1 second. Okay. Well, so let me just back up actually 1 sec. All right. Okay. And I do just want to kind of highlight what someone also just shared, that, you know, I think of, for example, the spiritual connection as being an aspect of this that can include things like, you know, faith, religion, connection to nature, right? Which we're not going to have as much time to talk about today as I hoped. But for some people, a spiritual connection might be, you know, what happens when you take a moment to look up at the stars at night, you know, or when you're just, you know, enjoying the way that the sunshine feels on a nice day, right? Anything like that, or when you're just eating some wonderful fruit or drinking some pure water, you know, anything along those lines. And I do think that, you know, because a lot of us are spending so much time with these artificial screens and technology, I think it's probably creating a need in us to interact with things that are natural more, right? To try to at least counterbalance some of this, or perhaps heal from whatever some of the negative consequences are. And I do think that the pandemic has kind of caused people to spread out a little bit more and perhaps have more opportunities to get outside a little bit more for a walk, or, you know, whatever. Because, for example, as someone said, you know, they're working maybe in their Nikes right now or whatever. So maybe it's a little bit easier to be like, hey, I'm going to work from home and then go for a walk at lunch or something. So it's, you know, I think it's something to kind of consider, that right now, because we're spending so much time with these artificial forms of technology, that nature is still here. We are certainly diminishing it because of the climate crisis, but it hasn't gone away, thankfully. And so there is an opportunity to interact. And I think that that's a really important piece. So to kind of begin to go into our dissent for this workshop, I'd like us to actually reflect on a bit of a poem. And this is from a poet named Hafez. And it says, I wish I could show you when you are lonely or in darkness, the astonishing light of your own being. And I'd just like you guys to just reflect on this a little bit, maybe write down anything that maybe, touches on something that you relate to or that resonates with you. So go ahead and take a minute or two for this. And we'll take another 30 seconds or so. Okay, and then wherever you can pause in your reflection or writing, go ahead and do so. And I'll just read this one more time. So I wish I could show you, when you are lonely or in darkness, the astonishing light of your own being. I'm wondering if anyone's willing to share anything on what this brought up for them. Yeah,
I know
Rebecca.
that.
We'll go to Rebecca
Okay.
first and then Aisha.
I think it made me, you don't see in yourself at times, or at times you're incapable of seeing in yourself what others do. Because right away it made me think of some friends that I know that are always shining a light. And, I know there's probably times where they don't feel that way or see it, but we see it in them. So the same would be true about oneself.
Great, thank you for sharing. And Aisha.
We are, as human beings, very social creatures, but oftentimes I think we maybe put a little too much on our connections with others, and we kind of get disconnected with ourselves and give ourselves less credit than we should be as human beings ourselves.
Excellent, thank you for sharing.
And this is Nanette, so I can't raise my hand.
Sure.
I actually have this poem on my office wall. I found it during a very dark period of my life. And what I wrote down was seeing truly who you are and all of the gifts that you have to offer.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Nanette, for sharing. Did I see Mary?
Sorry.
That's okay.
Of course, my granddaughter.
Good timing.
Who I adore. Anyway, I read it and I just thought that we all need someone who will come alongside you and remind you how special you are and how courageous and strong you are. And I know I have friends and family, including my granddaughter, who reminds me, Grandma, you're so special, or, just someone to make you realize that you are a special being here on this earth. So.
Excellent. Thank you, Mary. All right, guys. So there's a couple things I just kind of want to really close with. So I appreciate everyone who's been here, everyone who's sharing, listening. It's been wonderful to get to know you guys a little bit through this workshop, and to learn from you as well. And a couple things just to keep in mind. I mean, this is a challenging time for a lot of people, and so reaching out is always really important, right? And so whether that's calling folks like Andrea, and reaching out for some support that way, or reaching out to other people that you can rely on, this is a good time to reach out and pick up the phone and call. And then number two, just as a way to wrap up, I'm just wondering if maybe one or two or three people just want to offer any reflection on what it's been like to participate in this workshop for you today.
Everything is kind of palpable right now. I think everybody knows it, because this is an extended period now that we are all, in for this coming year, or this year that we're in right now. So thank you, Cuesta, for providing this. I learned a lot. I don't feel so lonely. Thank you all.
Great. Thanks, Marty. Thanks, Marty. Great to meet you.
I think I think when we have these opportunities to do Zoom meeting on personal issues, really helps, because then you know that other people are having this similar experiences and similar emotions. So we've had a couple this beginning of this season, and for me, it's just nice to hear what everybody else is feeling, and puts things in perspective, I think, for me.
Excellent. Thanks, Denise. And Randy, and you'll be our final word.
I've really enjoyed these experiences online because, like, as I'm going to school, my computer is just, I'm forever focused on like what I can do for my classes. And so it's nice to have this tool also be something to be able to recharge and make sure that I'm, mentally taking care of myself as well. And it kind of helps my brain compartmentalize a little bit more, because when we're in these environments, it's easy just to work all the time when you're at home, because there's not really any boundaries anymore. I'm not going to school. I could technically just work all day if I wanted. So it's nice to use some of these tools to kind of help us create better boundaries.
Great. Thanks, Randy. Okay, guys, I've enjoyed being here. I'll turn it back over to Andrea, and that's it.
Thank you so much, Dara. It's always a pleasure having this kind of connections with you. And thank you all for participating today. We are trying to provide this kind of support and strategies all the time. So always feel free to visit our website, follow us on social media, because we are trying to do our best to support not just our students, but our employees and faculty staff that are helping our community as well. So before closing, I would like to ask Dara for a favor. We have a raffle for the attendees who previously registered. So I will ask you to tell me a number between from 1 to 55, which is the number of participants we have on the list. And in case this person is not here right now, we will choose another number. Okay, let's go with lucky number 13. 13, let's see. Is Monica Fescalini. Not sure if this.
That's me.
It's you. Congratulations. So you're the winner. Gift card for a local restaurant. Support the locals, of course. So I will contact you later to send you the gift card. Thank you so much, everyone. I will post this video on our YouTube channel, and we'll share the presentation on the link, the educational repository on our website. Thank you very much, Dara, again. I really appreciate you.
Very welcome. Have a good afternoon. You're welcome. Goodbye.
Bye.